My name's Vincent DiMattio, and we were in my studio at Monmouth University, West Long Branch, New Jersey. Well, I'm from Quincy, Massachusetts, home of the presidents, John Adams and John Quincy Adams. It's always mispronounced. People say Quincy. It's not Quincy. It's more like a Z sound. It's Quincy. It was an interesting neighborhood to grow up in. I remember the sounds, a lot of the sounds from childhood. In those days, you didn't even have to go to a supermarket or to any kind of market. People came to you. I can still hear the refrain of some of these vendors. I'd hear them, the kind of sing-song manner where they'd say, milk, milk, or whatever it is they were selling. And that stayed with me as a child. At one time, the United States was a series of millions of neighborhoods. The neighborhood's kind of gone, it's passé. It's not the same where people really are part of a community.
1968. Johnson is president. Monmouth is a college. And a young Vince DiMattio enters the art department.
I wanted to be in a situation, I knew I wanted to teach. I had been teaching prior to Monmouth, and I wanted to be productive as an artist. The teaching part of it was always as important to me, but it's important in a very different way. I had to put food on the table. I had 2 children, and later on in life, a 3rd child, and I had to have some sense of responsibility. So the teaching was important to me because I had to provide for others. And once you start teaching and you're involved with young people, it's just kind of magic. They're terrific, these kids.
Enter 1968. A painting teacher walked into the room, a big booming voice, effervescent, and said, it's going to be a great, tough year.
He was bigger than life. And he sold me in about 2 minutes. He just he took me in his studio, showed me his work, and that's the first time I met him. And I just, he almost broke my hand when he shook my hand.
To be honest, I was actually scared of him. One of the only people I was ever scared of, but once you break down that shell, it's like he's one of the most humble people and wonderful people to talk to that I've experienced.
The kids usually despise me in the beginning, and I make it very clear that I'm not here to win a popularity contest. And they don't know that I really secretly love them, because I don't show it right away. The idea of circles and something within the circle is kind of intriguing. So think about it. You don't have to do it, but think about it. You look at what the course is called, it's called composition, basic design and composition. This is the same as going out and drawing the trees.
Vince's intensity and his following was super clear in the art department. There was no other classroom that summons this reverence of you must show up prepared, you must do your work.
He needs you to come to the studio, he needs you to work, he needs you to be on task.
It was tough at the time because I literally, you're gonna laugh, but I lived in a garage. No heat, nothing, and I had the worst car you ever saw. Everything was a struggle for me, but he didn't care. He was like, no, you're doing this, you're doing this.
There was no messing around. It was, this is it, you're gonna learn it, you're gonna do it, and you did it. I laugh at all the students that want to take art because it's an easy 3 credits, because Vince's classes were the hardest classes I ever had on campus, including quantitative analysis.
Yeah, you look for the fire in the belly, and you don't always find it. Sometimes kids have to mature a little before that happens. But it's there if they're willing to dig a little bit. So we got to make sure we can anchor it here in a solid way. Ah, he's getting into it. You can even come up like this. Don't be afraid of getting too architectonic with it. We can just go right in with 2 screws, and that baby's there forever. And you're developing some really nice shadows in here.
He took art seriously. And when he came in, he wanted us all to kind of feel it. Art is not just your class starts at 9 and ends at 10:30.
We had to go get our own lumber. He demanded that we make large format paintings. We had to miter our own corners. We had to stretch the canvas, gesso, and then paint.
And I did show up late. I was that guy. And he laid into me in front of the whole class. And I remember having to go to his office, knock on the door, and say, listen, this is what's happening. And he understood. He actually listened, and I think my grade reflected it.
They were prepared, and if they weren't, they did experience consequences, which is the closest thing they're going to find in the real world.
It all begins with drawing. Even color, everything, sculpture, everything, it all begins with drawing. And this is where the kids will fight you a little bit sometimes because they maybe don't want to draw. They just want to get on a computer as quickly as possible. And I try to convince them that if you draw and you use your hands and you use your mind, when you do get back to the computer, you're going to be a stronger designer because you've done things face to face, one-on-one. The second semester is kind of a deep study of color. And color I teach color in two ways. Color as a kind of science and color in terms of usage. In other words, you can set color up on a page in chart form and learn from it. That would be the scientific approach, I think, more than anything, the science of color. And then the most important part of color is when you're using it. What happens to color when artists get a hold of it and are able to do things with it? Now, I teach the method of Joseph Albers, which I believe in. He calls his study interaction of color. And the indication there is that color cannot just be judged in chart form. Color does things on its own. You dispel a lot of the old notions that blue is always cool or cold. I've seen blues heat up and get warm. Red is always hot or warm. I've seen reds go cool. Interaction, what they're interacting with.
Starting out as a freshman, I didn't really have a style. When I took a painting class at Professor DiMattio, he told me I need to start working with color. It's just changed the way I've been painting, and I've been incorporating a lot of color and just really finding my voice in my paintings, and he's really influenced that.
Color to me is so exciting, and I try to take risks with color. I give one project to my kids where I say, use colors you dislike. And they kind of look at me, and they want to know why. And I said, because if I don't have you do that, you won't do it on your own. And it's something about color that you'll miss. I got some of the most wonderful things in color that these kids hated. But if they hadn't done it, they wouldn't have known.
Vince, he's an educator, and he educated us in a time of our lives when we were finding ourselves. And Vince was one of those people that offered a little bit of a safety net.
I try to convince them that I'm trustworthy. So I tell my kids, come get me if you have a problem. And I think once you do that, even if they're not nuts about you, they know they can trust you.
He was always around, which is lovely. You knew pretty much you'd go up there and he had office hours, and even if it wasn't office hours, he was going to be there.
Unfortunately, there were times when I had a kid come get me when I'm in the men's room because, there was a problem that had to be addressed right away, and I'm in there washing my hands.
He would tell me the most valuable thing you can give to someone is your time, because you can never get it back.
He hates when his students say like too much.
It's this whole thing, too, with language. I really get on their case with the use of the word like. I will say, I'm hungry. They'll say, I'm like hungry. Well, what the hell does that mean? And awesome is another one that drives me right up a wall. I'll meet you in the center. Or how can that be awesome, meeting somebody at the center? That's not awesome. And I tell the kids, awesome is Christ walking on water. Awesome is an earthquake. You want to talk awesome? I'll show you awesome.
He was always really helpful and encouraging to anybody in whatever direction you wanted to take your art.
He really wanted to turn out artists. He didn't just want to turn out students who went through the BFA program. He wanted us each to find our little niche where we could go and be happy.
You could experiment aesthetically, you could experiment with different things artistically, but what I always remember is he was very specific about the quality of the output of the product.
I think the thing they hear from me most is, you know, you're given a kind of choice through this process. And the thing that I tell them is you can make art or you can make things that look like art. And there's a vast difference. If you're making things that look like art, a lot of those questions have been answered for you already by other artists. If you're willing to make art, then you got to dig a little. You know, you got to have something going that's perhaps it's not happening with other people.
I see my work, my film work, and other things I do in the idea that he forced me to be dedicated to it and do it.
He needed a story, and that was what we had to give to him. So over the years teaching AP Studio Art, that was what my students had to do. So yes, he was influential in a very good way.
He really helped me discover my form of art, taking natural forms and making it surrealistic with the human body in order to show symbolism, daily or universal struggles. The way he approached composition and language, that's what I truly want to incorporate.
Come on in here for just a second. See if you can develop some relationships right here. Yeah, I should be a mentor. I mean, that's part of what I should be doing. I think every college professor should try to do that, be a mentor.
He'd always encourage me to be every year in the faculty show, right next to him. When you look and you see all these calligraphic lines, and then you look at Vince's work and you can say, okay, I can see something going on there.
He's like, you should have a show here. I thought he was kidding. And I'm like, what? He's like, no, you should have a show here. But that meant I needed like 100 pieces, and I had a year to prepare for it. And I was like a little mini Vincent, because every night after work, I was up at my studio and painting away or drawing. Yeah, so yeah, there's been that constant thread since I met him, yeah, throughout my life and work, yeah.
When he gave me permission to be an artist for the first time in my life, it was like stamped permission, this is what you are, this is what I expect, you're gonna do it. It changed my life.
Well, I hope the hell I'm doing a good job of it, because if I'm influencing them in any way, or I am a mentor, I hope I'm doing it right.
And I like to move around. I don't stay in one place. Because that's when you're seeing relationships, when you're moving around.
I believe in the education. I mean, I wouldn't have been here for 50 years if I didn't believe in something. And I think we can be helpful. I think a kid can be a bohemian a lot easier in the studio area. And be a rebel, but not when you're dealing with technology and you're looking to get a job, and you're designing logos and you've got a customer that you have to please. These kids have to worry about that. There's an art director, and there's a client, and both of them are powerful and can rearrange your whole thinking.
Vince and I connected when I came back to campus, and we talked about the model of a business. And those conversations really helped me form the way I approach clients. I mean, I'm up to over 500 life-size statues. That's 110% reflection of him.
He really drove home to me, how is I going to make a living with my art? I translated that to jewelry. Making jewelry, designing jewelry. It was a way to marry what I loved and make it marketable.
I like the sense of mystery. I never know what they're going to look like, what the kids are going to look like. How many of them are really interested in art, and what's their reason for being there? And I ask them all these questions. Why are you here? And all of that. But that getting acquainted with them and getting to try to understand them is still exciting. These are human beings, and they keep, every year you have another, a couple of hundred or so of them that you come in contact with. They all have their failings and they all have their successes, and that's exciting. It's exciting.
He didn't show himself. He only wanted to showcase us, our art, and our abilities.
You can try to understand who he is in a semester or two, but that's not going to happen. It's really discovering who he is, how he pushes you over a several-year relationship as a professor.
when I was chair for 13 years, and we had to kind of build the department because we realized what kids wanted, and it wasn't to be a painter, it was the computer. And I pretty much took all the money we had back in the day and bought computers and made sure we built up that area. Now, I was in the studio area, and I didn't spend a dime on the studio area because of need. These kids needed this. And it was the only way this department was going to be viable. If this department just was old school, that would be lovely, we would fail. We would fail. We couldn't exist. Age has to do with energy, and one of the things you begin to lose as you get older is energy. And that bothers me a little. These trips that I've been taking with these kids, 24 trips to Europe over the years, and I dubbed them art in. So we did art in Spain, and later on art in Italy, art in Greece.
Oh, it was the best thing that I ever did, and I ensured that I went on that trip because every year he says it's going to be his last trip with his students, and since then he's gone on 4 more trips, and I'm sure he will go on more.
And the purpose of the trip was to get them involved with another culture, and especially in terms of the arts.
From the moment we got there, when we landed in Madrid, there was no let up. There was no let up. We were going to galleries. He knows Madrid really well, and he has a lot of friends there that are artists and printmakers, lithographers, and even little funny things like this. He would challenge you to eat stuff you would never put in your mouth. You know, like something would come out with a hoof on it, you know, and whatever. He was just like, he was forcing you to be a bigger person, you know, and really stretch, you know, and stretch your own comfort zone.
I want them out in the street. I want them involved. And I don't want them involved with other Americans. If you're going to have some friends, make some Spanish friends, make some Greek friends.
The understanding that Vince had and the fact that he had been there so many times and could share such beautiful little places that we may not have found. You know, sometimes it's just, you turn the corner and there's just a beautiful doorway.
I don't know if I can do another trip, but I sure as hell miss it because we've had some marvelous times. And the kids are terrific, just terrific travelers. Yeah, I would stay with these. Try to keep them around the same size.
Yeah.
I know you are trying, but see if you can do that some more. Okay. And this is working beautifully.
Thank you.
I want to see more of that. Okay, anybody else right now? Need any help? Bring it on over. Bring it on over. My health has not become a factor yet in terms of my teaching and even my productivity. And it's going to happen. You know, it happens to everybody. Come back in, give it a little more body. I look at people like Bob Recknitz and Ken Stunkel and, you know, some of my mentors, and I've watched them age, and it's significant. And yet, they do it with such dignity. Much more, this is what I wanted. I wanted you to do more of them, and I think it's helping you to do that. Yeah. Fill the page. Fill the page. If you let age rob you of dignity, it's really time to move on.
You know, he puts a lot of heart and soul into what he's doing. Students still like him. You know, when I run into Monmouth students and I ask about him, they still praise him just the same as we praised him when I was in class. So obviously he's making an impact. So to keep him close is important.
Over the course of a year, Vince, family, and friends scoured through thousands of works, meticulously choosing drawings, sculptures, and paintings for his upcoming retrospective.
I have 12 here. I have 12 here. So you got stuff now to shoot?
Yeah, you want to start?
Yeah. Well, he's being shot or no?
No, I think we have them.
Now this is 67. This was just before I came to Monmouth. And This is a landscape. That
Looks like you got 2 eggs.
It looks like fried eggs up in the corner. I got such a kick out of that. I almost thought about obliterating it, but I thought, no, it's too much fun. Love fried eggs. Everybody like fried eggs?
Of course.
This was from 2010. It's on wood. And this was some of the beginnings of the things I did with calligraphy. And I just wanted to get into this thing, get a new feel for it with golden letters. And this is called, the title is Golden Poem. I started right away. My father would, I don't know, for some reason he'd come home with these colored pencils and paper. I don't know if he just saw something in me. Some of the people he worked with would want certain things like fish, you know, a fish or something like that, and I'd draw it and he'd bring it back to them. In the first grade, they came and took a picture of me drawing a horse's head. It was used in a city annual.
Let's talk about art. Art. I can't do the Massachusetts long A.
He's been living here for 50 freaking years, and Pa, make art.
What is it, art?
If you're going to be an artist, you got to make art.
Or art.
First question, what is art? And I remember thinking, oh my God.
That's so funny. And they write it up. They put things on the board. They spell art A-H-T because of my Boston accent, I guess. I actually got that from an instructor I had in a design class at Mass Art. It was the first question that he asked when he entered the room. He said, what's art? And so I asked the same of the kids. And they have trouble with it. They have a lot of trouble with it. It's really a question that basically can't be answered, because it'd be easier, maybe easier to say what isn't art, because art encompasses so many things. So then after we battle this around a little bit, I read the very famous little essay that Oldenburg wrote about art, and he talks about chickens and tambourines, and he just covers everything, things that you buy in a department store, and he just goes through this whole litany of things that, you know, you don't think right away that it's art, but gee whiz, all of a sudden it is. Pharaohs tied in boxes, chairs with their bones broken, you know, things like this. And you start to read it and you get all these images. And that tells the story, because art, it's a 3-letter word, and you'd think, geez, you should be able to come up with something with it. It's only 3 letters, not very powerful. Not prowess. But that one thing really kind of sets the kids off, because they haven't ever made that question on their own. Mostly what they think is art has to do with what they grew up with and what their parents consider art. And that might be in the form of a calendar with beautiful vistas, you know. It might just go that far. So what is art becomes a crazy kind of question, I guess.
His work is who he is. I mean, he's intense, and there's energy there, and there's process there, and those things together make these really interesting prints and paintings.
Vince was always making art for himself, and he's certainly gone through phases, but he really followed his heart.
The one thing that I pride myself in, I mean, I've lived through all of these great movements in art, minimalism, pop art, things that were really American. I never got involved with any of them. I never said to myself, wow, pop art is in now, I better do that. I didn't see the sense in that. So I never joined any of these movements. I always tried to do things that other people were not doing. And I always tried to do things where I was an individual.
He has different bodies of work. There's so much variety, there's so much color, there's so much detail. It's really wonderful.
He made a piece on cocktail napkins where he would just draw all these wonderful designs, and he just kept going and going and going and going to the point where I remember he framed one of them, and it must have had like 40 napkins in it.
When people sit around waiting for inspiration, that's a very poor ball game. I don't believe in that you sit in your studio and you ponder things and then this thunderbolt hits you and wow, I got an idea. It's much more subtle than that, I think. I don't think there's this explosion. And the subtlety of it comes in just plain working. And, you know, you fool around. The napkin drawings, you know, that happened because I happened to be in a restaurant one day many, many years ago, and I was waiting for the food, and I took my pen and started drawing. And I just liked the idea. And I liked the way the ink took to that surface. So there was no great inspiration. I probably wiped my mouth a little bit first and then made some marks. So to wait around for inspiration is dangerous.
It looked like he was almost developing a language with his calligraphic marks.
You can't read them because you don't know what they're saying, but they look like they're really telling you something, and they're also different.
You know, it's two things. He was doing a lot of drawings with pen and ink. He was exploring that. But he was doing these beautiful, delicate paintings where he would explore variations of color with these little marks.
And then he moved into found objects, and he would create these constructions on canvas with things that he would find. Right now, what he's doing are making a lot of social statements.
I think one of them is titled Kissy Poo. I took the hairdos of the Korean guy and Trump and switched them and then showed them kind of in love with each other. I tried to have some humor with them. Despots, tyrants who come into office with great power, they all traditionally do certain things. One of the first things they do is try to destroy the free press. And I mean, imagine what we'd be like if we didn't have free press. We'd be like we'd be like Saudi Arabia, we'd be like Iran, we'd be like all of these countries. What if you had one state-run television, one state-run newspaper, one state-run magazine? It happens in places. But yeah, I get into politics now and then with my work.
Back then there were some, you know, some real like phallic type looking things.
Paintings that were more graphic, more erotic, put it that way.
This is part of the whole thing that I was doing with rituals and ceremony. I dealt with birth, I dealt with death. This one is an homage to love. I think when I visited Mexico many years ago, I was just so turned on by the cactus, these wonderful things coming from the land. I worked with sensuality, and a lot of my images, people say, well, they're just sexual. And I see this little bit of a difference between sensuality and sexuality. Sensuality is something that you can find in a kind of non-sexual way. And so I found that with these totems, these wonderful totems. With the Ancient Walls series of mine, that's probably the most prolific series because there's 108 pieces in that series. And as I was approaching 108, I knew I was coming to the end. There was nothing more. I could keep doing them, and it'd still be different. But why bother? There's other avenues I want to chase now. But that's a tough thing with all artists. When do I stop this and move on? Because the more you do the piece, the more you understand about it. And that's what I don't want. They were vital, and they meant something when I started them because I didn't understand them. And I didn't know enough about them. And that's when it's nice. this thing about inspiration is a very difficult one for me because I don't know where things come from. The Dream series, everybody wants to know what's happening in these things, you know, with these gory creatures and all this stuff. I know that I was going through a period where I was having trouble sleeping. I was having pretty much the same nightmare every night. And then those things started to happen. Now, I didn't wait for that to happen. And again, it was subtle. It just happened. And then I sat down one day and started drawing. And when I made those pieces, I had no idea what they were going to look like. I had no idea. They still surprise me. So I think it's a question of, you know, just puttering around, coming in here, moving things, looking at things. And every once in a while there'll be something that gets you moving a little bit. Now, if that's inspiration, I guess, okay. I just don't know if it is. I'm inspired by the fact that I just plain want to be an artist.
He was always in his studio, and he'd show me, look what I'm up to.
He almost took over the space.
And he surrounded himself with anything from jars to statues to clips of pictures.
The artist studio is a little sanctuary. You know, you have to build it to what you need. You want to be able to reach and grab your paintbrush. You want to know where all your pigments are.
Monmouth tries to give studio space to everybody, and it always has taken that approach. But I know in other universities, it's not always something you can take for granted or expect. So I see it as a gift. They've never put me to the test. They've never said, well, make sure you're using this studio, make sure you're doing this, make sure. They've left me alone. And I think when creative people are left alone, that's when things happen. And it's part of my identity because it's how I've used the space and what I've done with it. You know, I didn't accept this space from the university and then show up to it once every month. I put it to damn good use. I banged the hell out of the space. And it banged the hell out of me. Years ago, I had a little black and white television on the studio. I wanted the noise, I wanted the distraction. And then I got into classical music, and I would have classical music in the studio all the time. And then I started to pay too much attention to the to the music, and so I put an end to that. I'm better off with music that I don't necessarily fall in love with, just as a distraction. Sometimes you want some sounds around you, but I love silence. I'll take silence over sound any day.
In 2012, Obama is president, Monmouth is a university, and a new gallery name is revealed.
Usually when people have their name put on a building, they're wealthy or they're dead. I'm pretty sure I'm not dead. And wealthy, no, I don't have a cent. So that hit me first. And then I was just very moved by it all. I just never thought anything like that would happen. The Recknitzes have been friends for years. They've been great supporters of me and this institution.
He was always producing.
You have to apply the craft. You just can't say you're an artist. You have to actually be an artist.
You can't paint once a week. You have to paint every day. You have to be painting and flinging things on the floor and starting again, and more things go on the floor.
You know, there are people who still have this image of an artist. If you're not wearing a beret, you're not an artist. If you're not carrying a loaf of French bread and French wine, you're not an artist. And if you don't have naked women around you all the time, how the hell can you be an artist? It's all, it's romantic, but it's basically hard work, just like anybody else has to do. I've put in a hell of a lot of years, and I mean years, in a studio situation working. I love to work. I love the idea of making marks.
He's just so dedicated to what he's doing, and he just wants everyone else to be as dedicated.
He's an art factory. He just keeps creating and producing, and he's constantly in a studio on weekends and nights working.
Well, these are kind of unlikely colors to come together, and I like that kind of risk. I think when you're making art, you have to be adventurous and you have to be willing to take risks. And a lot of times things don't work, and That's just the way it goes. Now tomorrow when I come back, I may not like that at all, and I may simply paint it right out. It may never, you know, it'll cease to exist. It won't be a thing that I'm into tomorrow. Everything is an act of creativity. Even, listen, if you sit at home and you get a paint by number set, that's an attempt at being creative. And I applaud that. And maybe it's doing something good for the person. You know, there were these TV painters. I always used to get a kick out of him because he'd say, this brush is for trees. This brush is for ocean. Now, that's a lot of crap. And yet, I never condemn anybody for that, and I think it's entertaining. And he did get a lot of people interested in art, actually. But you know, you don't just say, oh, give me the tree brush now. You find a way of making the tree, no matter what the hell the brush is. Some people don't have a tree brush. So does that mean they can't use their ocean brush for the trees? You know, some artists feel like if you're going to make an important painting, it ought to be about something important. Matisse made hundreds of pieces of women sitting in chairs. It's not exactly World War II, is it? It's not exactly an earthquake. He would take that simplistic, everyday event, and what he brought to it was not simplistic, it was magic, and especially with color. And I always admired that. Giorgio Morandi, his entire career, a few little bottles and little ceramic pieces in his studio. He didn't have to go out into the world to be inspired. Over and over again, and you know what? You can put 100 of those paintings in a room and not one of them is alike. How the hell does he do that? So I admire artists for different reasons. Eva Hesse is one of my favorites, and you know, I got to spend an afternoon with her many years ago before she died. And just a tremendous spirit. And not anything that I would do, and I certainly wouldn't try to paint like Matisse, but I wouldn't be influenced in that way, but I'm influenced by them as heroes. The curious thing is I love a lot of figure painters, and I'm not a figure painter. Alfred Leslie is one who comes to mind. Usually I'm very spontaneous. For example, I don't know what's going to happen with this canvas after it's a black canvas. I have no idea what I'm going to do. And I kind of like to work that way. I've worked that way in just about everything I do, whether it's figurative stuff or abstractions. I always like the idea that I can be surprised. And a lot of times I'll work wet into wet, which I will do with this one as soon as I get the black coat down. When you do work wet on wet, you're actually mixing your paints right on the canvas as opposed to a jar or a palette. And it just makes for terrific spontaneity. Now, you know, at this stage, I'm being confronted by something. The piece speaks back to me now, and the piece starts to have its own life. Okay, now I'm further taking a risk by laying a bright pink in here. And of course, the black will pretty much destroy the brightness of that pink if I keep mixing. Otherwise, I can work it so that I can keep the pink outline around the form. And then I let this dry, and tomorrow I'm ready to make all kinds of changes in it. The creative people need something to rebel against. And if you're rebelling, it's healthy, and being a rebel makes for change. You know, as wonderful as the Renaissance was, one of the smartest things we ever did was not keep making the Renaissance. You know, it's in your age and your time. Rembrandt's experiences on this planet were very, very different than ours. What was the highest he ever got off of the surface of the planet? He was never in an airplane. He was never in a skyscraper. Some buildings in Amsterdam are 3 and 4 stories, certainly. He maybe climbed a tree or a hill. That's it. So what does he have in common with our culture? How fast did he travel? What was life like at night? I mean, life at night on our planet now, it's glorious. I mean, there's lights every place. You go to Times Square. If you put Rembrandt in Times Square, his brain would explode. You know, what the hell is this? Because his nighttime was by candlelight. So you have to put everything in perspective. I think change is good. Even if it's bad, it's good. Okay, because it means that people are still trying. They've got a vision that's a little different. And that's why you have different art movements. Somebody had to rebel against the Renaissance to produce something else.
He could have a full load of classes and teach so much to so many people, and at the same time put out more artwork than someone who only does that. You get a good sense of what it really takes to become a professional artist or a successful artist just by watching him.
Well, I know one thing. I know I'll never make large painting again. Those large paintings, what people don't understand about them, I built those stretches myself. I stretched those canvases myself. I put 2 coats of primer on them myself, and I sanded by hand those entire surfaces to make them smooth enough so there wouldn't be any bleeding of the paint. And I can't do that anymore. I can't make the real big painting. There's no way I can make that again, ever. Would I like to? Sure. I'd love to make another large piece as a kind of monumental piece. It's not going to happen. It'd be too much for me. And you know, you have to fess up to certain things. I do want to do another series of paintings before I kick off. And I'm not sure what they're going to be yet. There are things floating around up here. Who knows what the hell I'm going to do next? I never know. The big mistake someone made in life was putting a pencil in my hand, because I just kept using it. And I'm glad it went that way.
On September 14th, 2018, the 3 galleries at Monmouth University hosted a reception honoring Vince for 50 years as an influential artist and educator.
It's a great thing for an artist to have a retrospective. And it shows that there's a commitment through the years. And I think that's important. And that's important to students to see that too, that commitment lasted that long.
Vince is like a part of Monmouth. I don't know how they're not interchangeable.
He's worth celebrating. He's made an impact on so many people, this university.
I think he put his all into it. I think he put his heart and soul into it.
I give the big kudos to somebody who has practiced their craft and been able to teach at the same time.
With the contribution that he's made to this school, to art.
To be able to pull both those things off so successfully and equally intensely is really amazing.
And I know he's part of the reason that Monmouth is what it is.
To see him supported, to see him, have his space here and a gallery here for him. We could use this as a example to other institutions to support the arts, to understand that what an artist does is important to society.
First of all, to be around for 50 years isn't always easy. And to be at a place that I've considered very special, Monmouth University is that for me. This institution has always given me a studio, 50 years worth of studio. That's almost unheard of. And I had tremendous support over the years. I've had several sabbaticals. I was allowed to live in Spain for a year. Just all kinds of wonderful memories. And people have just been awfully good to me. And that's what I think is so special about this place. Look at this place I drive to every morning. Come on. It's like Eden. It's an incredible place. I've had wonderful colleagues. I've had wonderful students. Why the hell would I want to walk away from that?
I'm still bummed that when I was a student, there was a faculty show. One of his paintings was $200. I didn't buy it. Of course, I didn't have $200 that day, but I should have borrowed it and bought it. It's a really cool painting.
It's funny, I knew him when he was a relatively young man, you know? Sorry, Vince. Now you're not a young man, but neither am I. God, see, I know all this work.
He got kind of a kick out of me because when we would do critiques and things, he would say to the class, "Can you believe what this mom is doing?"
He has a very, not dark, but like a sense of humor that is very particular. You think he's not being funny because he's not smiling, but then give him 30 seconds to a minute later, then it is.
You want to impress him. You want to reach that high bar that he sets for himself. You really want to aspire to that. So I tried to outdo him with my snapping, popping, smoking alien alphabet. I think I scared the hell out of Vince. He ran over and unplugged it from the wall.
He's a special guy, special friend, and I'm really thrilled to be a part of this, you know, wonderful celebration for him.
Knowing that somebody like Vincent could do it for 50 plus years and be successful at it keeps you going, you know. You start getting a little bit older, a little bit creakier, a little bit more tired, don't want to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning making art. And you remember there's somebody like him still doing it. That's amazing.
Look, they named a studio after him. Who gets that? Who gets a building? I'd like a building. I'd like somebody to say that they named their child after me. But who gets that?
It's nice that there's people in your life that mean so much to you, even if you don't stay in touch and you don't pick up the phone all the time. I should have. So Vince, I'm sorry. I'll call more often.
And people don't believe me. They're like, he's been teaching there for 50 years? And I'm like, yes. He's been here, not just teaching for 50 years, he's been teaching in Monmouth for 50 years. And he's going to be compiling all his work and showing it. And it won't even be all of his work. It'll just be a fraction of it.
Well, my wife tells me that there's some kind of clause that if I die on campus, the insurance works better. So she's kind of hinted at that. I'm not sure how that works. So I think I may have dedicated myself to death on Monmouth soil. I'm not sure. I don't play with that one too much.